Welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you'll know when new videos are available. I really hope you enjoy this one.
All right, well then let's just jump right in. Let's get started. I'm going to share my screen with you guys. All right, so what you should be looking at is where we finished last week. We went through the items excluded, included. We went through about what smart home features were going to be included, about, again, which MLS you're going to market it in, and whether or not the seller instructed you to not take or use photographs in the marketing, which that's their prerogative. Obviously, we have to explain to them what that means for them, as far as, you know, the desirability of the house and how does it attract buyers, because, you know, the buyers are going to want to see a little bit of what it looks like inside before they come out. So they just have to make sure that they're clear, that they understand that, because ultimately, if we're not clear with them and explain what the consequences of not having the photographs are, they're going to blame us when the property isn't selling as fast as they thought it should, right? So just make sure that this is all communication with your seller. Okay, down to page 2, paragraph 2F1. Remember this whole grid here that we're going through, this is paragraph 2, okay? Timing of presentation of offers. I like that they added this in. Seller instructs broker to present all offers received as soon as practicable, right? So if you get an offer the day after it goes on the market, the seller saying, hey, go ahead, present it to me right away. As soon as you have it, if it makes sense that you could present it, present it. Or you can put in the listing agreement that they have a specific date that they want to wait for those presentation of offers. Or you could put a certain amount of days after that you put it in the MLS that you want to present all the offers. So they have a couple choices there. Okay, so that's a conversation you have with your seller. Is like, look, do you want me to just present offers as they come? Would you rather wait, you know, a week or two and see what offers we collect, present them all in a bunch? Or do you want to, let's say we're going to wait 10 days after we start marketing it before we present all offers? Fine. But that's a conversation with the seller. I don't like when the agents make that choice on their own. So again, I like that this is put into the listing agreement, because it's now a conversation I have to have with the seller. So it brings the seller in, makes them part of the decision, have them direct you on what they want to do. Okay. Next, buyer supplemental offer letters. This is the love letters that buyers write, right? The default is we're not supposed to present those. We're not supposed to give. As a buyer's agent, we're not supposed to send those with our offers. Unless you ask, you could ask the listing agent, by the way, is the listing agent accepting, or is the seller accepting the supplemental offer letters, right? The love letters that we all kind of call them. You could ask that before you submit, but don't just submit it blindly and say, here, this is what we want. Because based on the fair housing paperwork that comes with the purchase agreement, it says that they consider those love letters that they're a possible detriment to the buyer, because a seller could then make a decision based on the information that was gathered there, you know, about their race or orientation or ethnicity or, you know, sex, whatever it is. They could make a determination and decide not to sell the house to them based on that, on a negative way, instead of what we assume that love letter is going to do is have the seller say, well, I love these people and I want them to have the house. So the default is that you're not going to present those. But if the seller says, no, I'd love to see those letters. If a buyer is taking the time to write a letter and explain to me why they want my house and love my house, great. So if that's the case, then you would have to check this box. So you check the box. Seller instructs brokers to present buyer's letter. If seller requests or relies on buyer letters, seller is acting against broker's advice. So they can make that choice on whether they want them or not. Now, here is where we're saying that the seller is going to pay for and provide. Well, does anybody have any questions about the supplemental letters? I think we've gone through it enough times that most people are probably pretty clear with how that works and what that means. But does anybody have any questions about that? No? All right. So investigation reports. The natural hazard disclosure report is already by default checked off, which means the seller is agreeing. And if you look at this second section over here, seller shall order and pay for any report selected within 5 days of the beginning of the date of this agreement. So they have to understand that that's what we're going to do, is that if we check any of these things off, excuse me, they're going to do this right away. We're not waiting for an offer. And for you as listing agents, that should be just part of your MO. When I go in and do my listing presentation with the seller, one of the things that I'm going to let them know is, hey, for example, this is in the city of Southgate or Compton or wherever else there's a city pre-sale inspection. By the way, we have a pre-sale inspection. Before we put your house on the market, we're going to make sure that we order the inspection so that we can get it back in a timely manner, that we have it. So by the time that we start marketing your property, we know what we have. We can send to all of the potential buyers or people that write offers. Here in the counter, here is the city pre-sale inspection report. Buyer to be responsible for any of those repairs. And I can do that from the beginning. So yes, it may weed out buyers, but instead of us waiting until we've been on the market already for 15, 20, 30 days, getting an offer, then going to the city and ordering that inspection report, then waiting for that inspection report to come back, then sending it to the buyers, right? By the time that happens, especially in places like Southgate, unless you want to pay extra for an express inspection, it's going to be 4 weeks. So if I wait until I have my offer accepted, I'm already in escrow. And then we order the inspection. 2 weeks later, they do the inspection. 2 weeks after that, I get the inspection report back. We're at close by the time I get the report. And you have no idea how many times we deal with here in the office. Well, we're ready to close, but we haven't gotten the pre-sale report yet. It happens more regularly than it should. So as listing agents, you all have to start making sure that part of your listing presentation and the way that you guide your clients is that they have to take care of those reports immediately. We got in the chat, therefore city inspection would be under other. Yeah, here it would be under. I would put, city pre-sale inspection report. Can we have investor waive pre-sale inspection? No, you can't waive. No, I think, what's the city there's one city and my mind just went blank that allows you to actually pay and waive. Gardena, thank you, Tina. Gardena, I know that one for sure will allow you to waive it. You just have to fill out the paperwork, and I think you have to pay. But they'll waive it. None of the other cities will waive it. They'll allow the buyers to take responsibility for the repairs that are required, but you are required to order the report. And this is another thing on the flip side of this. If you're representing a buyer that has now taken responsibility for those repairs, right? So Southgate, you have 6 months. They have 6 months to take care of those. If they don't repair those required items that are in that pre-sale inspection report, and then 2 years later decide to sell their house, they order their inspection report because they have to provide one over to the buyer. They then cannot have the buyer take responsibility. The city won't allow it. So now the seller will have to do it prior to close. Okay? So keep in mind that not only do we have to advise our sellers properly on how these pre-sale inspections work and anything else that we're going to do, but we also have to make sure that our buyers understand what their responsibility is once they have taken on the duty of completing the repairs that the city wants. It's important that everybody understands. I don't know, Jesus wrote, and you leave a bond. I don't think Gardena requires a bond for the waiver. So in this case, we're talking about the pre-sale inspection reports, but, and I've mentioned this to you guys over the course of, the years that we've gone through these contracts, is that there's this general property inspection, right? That's a professional home inspection, basically. If you have a seller that has not lived in a property for 10, 15, 20 years, they've been renting it, right? And now they're looking to sell it. They still have the same duty of disclosure as if they had lived in that house for 20 years. And what will happen inevitably is that seller will tell you, I don't know what to disclose. I never lived here. I don't know. Okay, so a couple things that you have to remind them of. Number one, you were the homeowner, right? You were the landlord for that tenant. I assume that any repairs needed to be done were done by you, paid for by you, scheduled by you. And maybe they weren't. Maybe they had a relationship with the tenant that the tenant took care of those things. Regardless, the seller has the responsibility and the duty to disclose material facts about the property. And the idea that they never lived in it does not release them from the liability of those disclosures. So, what I always suggest you guys do for these sellers that haven't lived in a property for a long amount of time is do your own home inspection. Pay for a home inspection report. And you could do that. And you can compel them to do it here. You put it into the listing agreement and say, okay, well, we're going to do this professional home inspection. Now what you do with the professional home inspection is you attach it to your TDS. And now it becomes part of the disclosure. Now it's part of your disclosure, so you're helping them. So you have the ability to do that. Again, if I check off this box that says that the seller's going to pay and order any of these reports within 5 days of us beginning date of this listing agreement. We have to get a prelim and send a prelim, so you might as well. You could check that off. If there was the HOA docs, you could put those in there and say, okay, I'm compelling you to do that. Now, the HOA docs, I would say we could leave those out. Those normally get ordered by escrow. They get ordered by escrow once the buyers put the deposit in. That's the timeline. But you have to just make sure that you're aware of what that timeline is, right? The contract says I have to give it to you in 7 days. Make sure that gets taken care of in 7 days. Okay, so let's say that we got all of these things, and we had the pre-sale inspection right here. And if you could put the name of the city, right? So if it's Compton, you could put the Compton pre-sale inspection. And remember that with the majority of these pre-sale inspections, nobody but the seller or the listing agent can order it. And in the case of Compton, it's the listing agent has to order it, and you have to go there with the business license to do all that to order it. Okay, so questions about the investigation reports? Anybody? Nope. All right. Exceptions to ownership and title. That's just if there's somebody else that could have a claim to ownership, could have some kind of a claim to the property that is not on title. You ask the seller. If the seller says no, there's nobody else. Okay, seller states there are no exceptions. Right? That's it. That's all you have to do, just so you can show that you spoke to the seller about this, because if something comes back and there's somebody else that causes an issue, at least you can turn around and say, I did my job, the seller didn't do theirs, okay? This is if the seller is going to find and buy a replacement property. I don't mind you guys putting it in. The verbiage has changed. In the previous RLA, what it said was this listing is contingent upon the seller finding and replace a property, which meant then that if they didn't find the replacement property, not only could they cancel a transaction, the transaction or an offer they may have accepted, but they could cancel the listing. The verbiage was a little, squishy in that way, and I don't like that. It kind of gave them an opportunity. So we didn't find a replacement property we could cancel. Not to say that it's not okay to say to a seller, okay, I'll let you guys cancel your escrow or cancel your listing because you obviously can't find a place to live. And what's the point of having a house to sell that the seller doesn't want to go anywhere? But with this one, now all it's saying is just them saying, hey, I intend for this to have a seller's purchase or replacement property as part of any transaction that comes from this listing. That's it. That's all it says. The next section up here is the opt-outs. If the seller doesn't want you guys to have a lockbox or the seller doesn't want to have a sign, that's it. They have those. They have the spaces for them to check the box and exclude those items. Not put a sign, not put a lockbox. Again, the conversation, just make sure that if you have a seller who says, I don't want the lockbox and I don't want a sign, have the conversation with them about what the potential damage that does as far as selling the property and in a timely fashion or for the highest price possible, right? It's going to diminish the amount of availability for a buyer's agent to show it, and it's going to diminish the exposure because there is no sign. Okay. Additional terms: anything that you may want to add. For example, there could be a buyer that is excluded from this listing, from the requirement of the seller to pay you compensation, for example. Have any of you guys ever been on a listing appointment where you've gone through the whole presentation, seller's pretty much ready to sign, and then they bring up, but there was this guy that came and said that he would, buy my house cash. We wouldn't have to pay for any escrow fees or anything like that. He would take care of everything. And he wants to buy it. He said he would buy the house. What happens if he comes back? Now, if he comes back and wants to buy it, I have to pay you compensation. You could say, okay, if a specific buyer, if John Smith purchases the property that the commission is less, that they don't have to pay the full 3-4 whatever % commission, whatever it is you've negotiated with them as seller. You could say that, okay, well then I'll step away and you have to, work as a for sale by owner. I won't be helping you with the sale. You could put stuff like that in. You could put in, anything that we haven't referenced in here, you could add too. Like, I know that some agents tell their sellers that their seller can cancel this listing at any time. I don't necessarily agree with that business model, but to each their own, and anybody could have whatever business model they feel works for them. If that were the case, you could write in here, seller may cancel this agreement in writing, after 30 days, after 90 days, whatever it is. You could put that in there if you wanted to. I know that there are some agents that do that. So this is kind of like the catch-all for anything that you want to add to the terms of this listing agreement. You could put it in there. Okay. If you're going to have your seller pay for the TC fee, right? You're going to have a transaction coordinator. You want the seller to pay the transaction coordinator. You could add that in there too. Okay. So any questions on the grid portion, on paragraph 2 of the listing agreement? That's where really all the negotiating is done. Everything we're going to go on now is more just explanation of paragraph 2. Yeah, go ahead, Jesus.
We don't say anything about commissions, correct?
What do you mean we don't say anything about commissions?
Or especially about commissions.
I don't know what you're talking about. We don't say anything about commissions?
Let's say they pay a little more, or we get extra percentage, or
If you're going to do that, then I would go back here and say, instead of putting 3% here, I would say let's do a compensation schedule, and all that is going to be as an addendum to the contract, and then you could write it in there. Seller to pay 3% unless sales price is X, Y, or Z, and then the commission is 4%, or there's an additional $2,000 that gets paid over this, whatever. I would do that here. I wouldn't do that here.
thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Any other questions? No? Okay. So we did. Now I can go back to what I thought I was going to talk about. Last week at the end of the class, we talked about excluding your listings from the MLS. So let's talk about that for just a second. I want to really kind of make sure that you guys are clear on this, because I want everybody to avoid the possibility of having any kind of violation or fine that they have to pay. So according to the clear cooperation policy of the MLS, every listing we take must be active or coming soon within 2 business days of the start date of the listing. Not when we take the listing, but the start date. Now, the start date may be different. And the way we determine the start date, I mean, it sounds silly to say that we have to determine, but how we determine the start date is either, whichever is later, either the start date that we put up here, right? Either the beginning and end date that we put here, beginning, or whichever is later, either this date or the day the seller signs it. That's how they're going to determine. So, for example, because it's happened to all of us, I am prepared to go on a listing appointment today with Armando. I was prepared to meet him today, so I draft my listing agreement today. I have my start date as today. Something happens, and we don't meet till tomorrow. Right? So my start date shows today, but his signature will show tomorrow. Now, I could rewrite the listing agreement, but sometimes agents don't do that. So they use the same listing agreement that they were prepared for on their listing appointment, and 2 or 3 days later, when they finally get in front of the seller, that's when the seller signs and agrees to list the property. When that happens, instead of it being that 10/10 start date instead of today's date, the start date that they count for the MLS begins the day they sign the listing agreement. So if the seller, for example, signed the listing agreement on Sunday, which is now going to be the 13th, then that would be the time that starts your 2 days. Okay? So I would have Monday would be day 1, Tuesday would be day 2. So if I took the listing on Sunday, by Tuesday, it either has to be active or coming soon. Okay? Now, or registered. Registered also. Registered is basically when we're keeping the property off the market. But in order to do that, to register a listing, I have to use a form called the seller's instruction to exclude listing from the multiple listing service and days on market. So when you register your listings, that doesn't count days on market. In the previous listing agreement, in the previous RLA, there was a section, paragraph 7D, that you could reference all of this in. If you hadn't done that and then the seller, say, changed their mind and wanted to exclude it, you could use this form, okay? But now we've gone back to it. In this new listing agreement, we went back to if you're excluding the property from the MLS, and what we mean by excluding is it's not going to be on coming soon or active. You're not marketing it. You must have this agreement signed with your listing agreement. You have to have it together. If we don't have this and we list the property and then fail to put it in the MLS in a timely manner, we could be facing a potential $2,500 fine as agents. So I just need you guys to understand that now this step is required. And the thing is that, I mean, there was a step required even with the previous version of the listing agreement. It was a paragraph in that listing agreement. And even then, agents were failing to fill that out and they were still registering their listings. You have to be very careful about that registration process and make sure you're doing things properly. Because if, for example, I have a seller that I didn't get them to pay me this instruction or sign this instruction to exclude it, and then they want to get rid of me, right? They want to say, hey, I don't want to work with you anymore. I've just given them an opportunity as to why they may be able to cancel their agreement because I'm not living up to the terms of the agreement that the seller and I signed, which is that I'm going to start marketing the property immediately. And a lot of times when this happens, we may have a conversation with the seller and tell them what we're going to do, but it's not memorialized anywhere. There is nothing in writing that's proving that we had that conversation with them and that they agreed with the process of not putting the home on the market right away. So you guys have got to start looking for this. And here in the office, we're going to be requesting it when you turn things into the listing coordinator. If that property is not going to go active within 2 days of the start date, you better have one of these instructions, okay? Because we have to be on it. This is to look out for you and to make sure that you guys are protected and that you're doing the right things by your sellers, that you're transparent with them on what your marketing practices are. Because I know that what happens for most agents is they are excluding these things from the MLS to give themselves an opportunity to find a buyer before anybody else's competition. The problem is that what you have to understand of how the statuses work, which is for the excluded listings, that would be registered status. Then there's coming soon status, and then there's active. We all know what that is. So registered, let's start there. That's the seller fills out this or agrees to exclude the property from the MLS. They sign this form, the SELM. And they have a date when you're going to do it, right? Either for a period of a certain amount of calendar days. Let's say that for the first 12 days, we're not going to market the property at all. Then you would put that in here for a period of 12 days from the beginning of the listing, and then I register it for those 12 days, okay? Or I could say, we're going to do a specific date. Maybe the seller is doing some work. They don't want anybody to see it. They don't want to show it. Here we go. We're not going to market it until, for a month, let's say, till November 10th. Okay? You could do it that way. Or you could say for the entire listing period, do not put my property on the MLS. Do not market it. Now, what does marketing mean? Marketing means it can't go in the MLS. Marketing means you cannot, if it's registered, if it's an excluded listing, you cannot put up a sign. You cannot hold an open house. You cannot put it on your social media. You can't put it on your website. You cannot show it unless you have a disclosure regarding agency relationships signed with the potential buyer that you're showing it to within the last year. Okay? So you have to understand what that means. So if your process is, I'm going to exclude the listing from the MLS to give myself an opportunity to find a buyer, you're only able to talk to potential buyers who have signed a disclosure regarding agency relationships with you. So if I have a buyer that I was working with, couldn't find them a home, I get this listing and I think it will fit for them, I can pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, I just got this listing. It is not on the market. Would you guys like to see it? And I would be within my rights and within the rules to show them this property, write an offer, and put them in escrow. That would not be a violation. But if I took this listing and then got on my mojo and started dialing numbers and saying, hey, I got this new listing, right? 123 Smith Street. Do you know anybody that wants to move into the neighborhood, right? And I start marketing it, prospecting, trying to get buyers for the listing. I could be in violation. Okay. So, for example, if I make those phone calls and an agent happens to hear, or an agent happens to be one of the people that picks up the phone, which happens a lot, you guys that prospect know that you get brokers on the phone all the time. That broker picks up the phone and you give them the listing address and tell them that you got this new listing that you want to sell, and then they go to the MLS to look it up and it's not there. And they report you to the board for marketing a listing that's restricted or registered, excluded. You could potentially get a $2,500 fine. So, again, registered. You can show it, and you can let a very small number of people know about it, right? Which is any buyer that you've signed an agency disclosure with in the last year. The benefit to that is I can tell everybody in my brokerage, because we're all under the same umbrella. The brokerage owns the listing. So I could send out a mass message to everybody in my brokerage and say, hey, I have this off-market listing. If you have a buyer you're working with, and now every buyer that you're working with should have an agency disclosure signed because we all have to sign a buyer representation agreement with them, you could show that buyer that house. Okay, so there's the kind of parameters of registered, which is the excluded listing. Second is coming soon. Coming soon, I can do everything as if we're active. I can door knock, I can cold call, I can send out flyers, I can put it on my Facebook, I can put it on my website, I can put it on Instagram. I can call the world. I could do a television commercial if I wanted to. The only thing I can't do is show it, which means no open house. So I can put up a sign, I can market the hell out of it, I can get people to be excited about it. I just can't show it to them. Okay? I can put up a sign, everything, just cannot show it. And coming soon is a maximum of 21 days. Once we get past those 21 days, it automatically goes to active. Okay? Now, the two great things about coming soon and excluded: no days on market. You get 0 days on market, so when it goes to active, it shows 00 that day. Okay? So those are the benefits and the pros and cons, let's say, how you can do what you need to do. So just understand that if we don't work within those parameters, if someone finds out, it gets reported to the CRMLS, you will face a fine, and there is no out. There's no way out. You cannot dispute it. You can't go to a hearing. None of that. You pay it. There's no warnings. It is just a fine. That is it. Let's see. How is that different than the multiple listing service addendum where it says seller instructs broker to begin marketing the property to the public on? That's just a confirmation of how the MLS works. This is the one thing saying that it has to be excluded. And this is what the board, they're not going to be okay. CRMLS is not going to say, oh, you have your MLS service addendum. No, they want the SELM. It specifically requires it and asks for it. Yeah, go ahead, Jesus.
Okay, let's see. It's coming soon, but am I be able to show it as a listing agent, or not?
No,
even me?
you can't. Nobody could show it. When it's coming soon, nobody can show it. That's the point of coming soon. It's not ready to be shown. It's coming soon.
Okay.
But agents love to bend the rules a little bit. Okay, let's see. Who do we got here? I don't know who iPad Pro 12.9 inch is, but go ahead.
Sorry, Kyle. It's me, Eric. I have a question. So, I had a property that is started with coming soon. However, seller, we still negotiating with the tenants to provide permission to show it. And the problem is tenants, they're not ready to show the property, so it's going to take a little bit longer than 21 days. So what I did is, instead of putting inactive, I changed the status from coming soon to hold. And it
Okay.
still is going to show any days on that?
No, hold doesn't show days on market either. No, you're fine with that.
Okay.
That was the right thing to do.
Perfect.
Yeah, that was the right thing to do.
Okay.
Absolutely. If your tenants aren't ready to let you in to show it, then and you know you can't go past those 21 days because it's going to move to active, putting on a hold is the right thing to do.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Tina, go ahead.
Hey, I'm driving. Kyle, if I register a listing and I have it in the terms that the seller is going to try to, fix their foreclosure, and if they can't fix it, then I'm going to sell it. But I don't put, there is a start date, but I just register the listing. Let's just say I register the listing, they end up fixing their foreclosure and paying their arrears and catching up. Mm-hmm. Do I need to do anything after that with that listing contract?
Well, if you're registering, you're excluding it, you have to have this. You have to have the seller instruction to exclude the listing, right? So you have to have that. And you have to have one of these checked. A certain amount of calendar days, a date, or for the entire listing agreement. So my suggestion is that you check it off for these people, that you're giving them the option of, okay, we're going to list it. I'm going to help you and see if we can cure your default. If not, we're going to put it on the market. Great. I'm going to give this exclusion. I'm going to have them check this box that's during the entire listing provided for in the agreement, the period. Then if they can't cure the foreclosure and we are going to change it to active, where we're going to put it in the MLS and actively market it to buyers, then I'm going to do a modification of terms listing agreement, right? The MTLA. I'm going to do that and say seller instructs broker to begin marketing the property on X date and have them sign it. And now I'm going to put it in. Now I'll take it from registered and push it to the MLS and make it an active listing.
Okay, got it. And then who do I give do those items get uploaded to the MLS? And I'm just curious because it's like, who the hell finds out? Like, who tells on us?
Who tells? Everybody tells. Other agents are telling on you. As soon as they find out that property is available and they can't see it or it's not in the MLS the way it should be, they tell on you. And sometimes it turns out that it's not somebody told. It's that we have an issue that we have to go to the board for, to the CRMLS, to kind of defend ourselves, and we didn't do it right, so it now takes away from the defense, because now we're turning ourselves in and saying, hey, we didn't fill out this listing properly, we didn't do these things properly. So that's the stuff we have to be concerned with, is that maybe somebody doesn't go see it and go, oh, I'm going to call and turn in Tina Louise, but you have an issue with another agent that's encroaching on your client and trying to change things, and maybe they take a listing and put it on the MLS because you had yours excluded. And then all of a sudden now you got to go fight to figure out how to get that listing off the MLS. And then you have to tattle on yourself that, oh, I didn't have the right paperwork and I just registered the form, right? That's happened to us now twice already, that we can't make that fight because of it. So that's the kind of stuff. It's not necessarily that somebody's going to find out you have it. It's that you put yourself in a position where if you need to, you can't defend yourself.
Okay, so then now, just so I can go back to a couple of my listings, can I just do a modification of term, that MTLS, and then exclude it off the MLS?
Nah, well, no, because you're still in violation. Just doing the modification, you're still in violation because you registered a listing that didn't give you instructions to register a listing. So going back and re-getting the instructions is still a violation because you started it when you started it. I mean, look, you can't erase what we did wrong previously. Like, you'd have to basically rewrite a whole new listing and then put it in the MLS, you know?
Then I'm going to do it that way. Okay, that's the easiest fix.
But I'm just saying, don't do that stuff. Just do it right from the beginning, right? Okay. Like, that's not the right thing to do. It's the only thing you can do.
No, correct. But just to fix the issue now, I could just rewrite the contract and then upload them back into MLS like new.
Yeah, if you're gonna put it as active and well,
Okay.
you're, you know what I mean. Like if that's your intent, is
Yeah.
at some point it's gonna go active, then yes, you could do it the right way now.
Oh, thanks, Jesus. Okay, thank you.
All right, let's see. Okay, all right. All right, let's get back to the list. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure that you guys were clear on that. So let's get back to the listing agreement, and we're gonna briefly go through the explanation paragraphs that come after. Oh, wait, hold on a second. I got a question. As a listing agent, how can you cancel a listing? You mean cancel the listing agreement with a seller or cancel from the MLS? I don't know which one you mean, Melissa, but here's the answer to both. If you want to cancel a listing with the seller, there is a form for canceling the listing in Zip Forms. We could bring it up so you guys can see it. It is, oops, sorry, it is right here, cancellation of listing. So you fill out the information on the cancellation of listing, what the date of the listing was. You choose here if you had in your listing agreement that you had that continuation of compensation, right? The 180 days or the 90 days or whatever it is that you filled out, you put that there. You give them a copy of the list of the people that saw the property with this cancellation. You could pick an amount of the listing price and say, hey, because we already marketed and stuff, you guys have to pay me for this, pay me this amount to get the cancellation. Or you could check up the box on A, which is first you have to put if prior to the end of the listing specified in the listing or an extension principal into contract to sell, convey, lease, or otherwise transfer the property, you could put this in, right? You could put that they're going to pay that percentage. You could put a flat rate that they're going to pay you that flat rate, or you could put that they owe you no compensation. You cannot sign it. One of us has to sign, the broker or one of the office managers has to sign this, okay, to cancel the listing. That's how it works. But yeah, that's how you do it. And in the MLS, if you want to cancel it, unfortunately here, I don't know, outside of here, but here you'd have to let our listing coordinator know that you want to cancel the listing and they can cancel it for you. Okay. All right. So let's go back to the listing agreement. Let me get back down here. Okay. So paragraph 3 is all of the advisories and the addenda that are attached to this listing. So if it was a short sale, you'd have the short sale information advisory attached. If it's an REO, you'd have this attached. If it's a trust, you'd have the trust advisory attached. Any addenda, that's the addendums, right? If you have any addendums that you fill out that are part of this, you would check the box and put addendum 1 or addendum 2, whatever it is. The compensation, this is going to go into detail about how compensation is paid, and that in this agreement that you're only agreeing to pay compensation to the listing broker. That's it. Okay. That's what that's about. Additional compensation terms, buyer breach and seller recovery of damages. So what they're saying here is that, and we've talked about the compensation before, right? So how a broker can be compensated from a listing. Right? There's multiple ways. So obviously, number one is you're going to pay me the compensation we've agreed to when we sell your house. Very straightforward, right? If the seller defaults, the broker could still have the right to get paid, right? The seller does something to make the property unmarketable. They cancel for no reason. They do something, right? Whatever it is, you get in a transaction, the seller screws it up. It's the seller's fault. They could owe you compensation for that. The continuation of right of compensation, we just talked about that in the cancellation right, where we put in the contract either the 8, 90, or 180 days. If they sell to one of those people that was on that list, that prospective buyer, they would owe you compensation. The seller interference with the listing. If prior to getting into a transaction, the seller takes down your sign, stops taking care of the property, won't return your calls, won't allow showings, they could get paid. If the buyer acts in bad faith and cancels the transaction and the seller is able to retain their deposit, technically they owe us half of that deposit or our compensation, whichever is less. So you have to actually explain that to them. Okay. This talks about the seller's compensation obligations to other brokers. We talked about that in paragraph 2C, and it references back to that. Maximum listing period. We know that the listing period is only 24 months. It talks about here about items included, excluded. It goes into detail about what is normally included or excluded from the sale, at least or not owned items and liened items that we talked about, that we mentioned earlier in paragraph 2, and the smart home features. So it just gives them a little bit more detail about what those items in paragraph 2 were referencing. Seller representations. Seller represents that unless otherwise specified, seller is unaware of any notices of default recorded against the property, any delinquent amounts due under any loan secured by or obligation affecting the property, any bankruptcy, insolvency, or similar proceeding affecting the property, any litigation, arbitration, administrative action, government investigation, or other pending or threatened action that affects or may affect the property or seller's ability to transfer it, and any current pending or proposed special assessments affecting the property. Seller shall promptly notify broker in writing if seller becomes aware of any of these items during the listing period. It's important that you have that conversation with the seller, is that you talk to him and say, hey, listen, there is nothing else that's affecting. There's no pending lawsuits. There's no substandards that were filed. You haven't had any problems with the neighbor or with an encroachment or anything that you're aware of, or you don't have any tax problems or child support liens that are going to show up or haven't been recorded yet. Those are things that you have to have a conversation with them. And I know that most of the time that they sound like they could be sensitive, but you have to have this because you have to be prepared for it going in. Okay. This talks about the broker and seller's duties. Look, we have a certain amount of responsibility, but we have to be clear on where our job lies. We're not going to be the one we're not supposed to, or let me say, we're not required to be the one ordering reports and things. We can when we have authorization from the seller to do it. The problem is that most of the time we don't really do it in a way that looks like we have authorization from the seller. We just do it on our own. And I mean things like ordering a termite inspection or, anything else that may have to get done. We kind of do that on our own. We take the initiative to do that. And I know that we kind of communicate with, but I think what needs to happen is if your seller's saying, yeah, go ahead and tell the termite company to do the work, right? Then there should be an email, something actively showing this active communication and the authorization from your seller before you do it. Because if we don't have that, they're going to be like, I never agreed. If they want to have amnesia and not take responsibility for what happened, they could say, well, I never authorized you to do that. You're the one who signed the work order, not me. Again, keep in mind that anything that we do that's outside of what's in these documents have to have some kind of instruction from our client, okay? This is, again, going to talk about the presentation, right? We talked about when they're going to present offers earlier in paragraph 2, like, are we going to do them immediately or are we going to wait for a certain amount of time? This talks about it. Strategies affecting delayed offers and buyer broker compensation. There are different strategies for obtaining the best offer for seller. Sellers advise that certain buyers may prefer not to be in a competitive situation, either may not make an offer if there is an instruction that all offers will be presented at a later specified time, or may try to make a preemptive offer that will expire shortly, hoping that seller will accept before the presentation date. Additionally, certain buyers may not be able or allowed to pay compensation to a buyer's broker. These buyers may request for seller to pay buyer's broker through a term in the purchase agreement or through a separate compensation agreement. Seller is advised to discuss and consider the best strategy for seller related to the presentation of offers. Okay. Seller instructs broker to present offers. Broker agrees to present all offers received for seller's property and present them to seller as soon as possible, unless seller gives broker written instruction to the contrary. Seller instructs broker not to present offers until later time. If checked in paragraph 2F1, seller has elected to have broker hold all offers and present them to seller as specified in 2F1. Broker will inform seller that an offer has come in, but will not submit the offer to seller unless specifically instructed otherwise in writing. Local MLS rules may impact this practice and whether it will provide any benefit to seller. Broker and seller may amend this instruction agreeing in writing. So again, if you have that checked off that we're not going to present offers until 2 weeks or whatever, if they get an offer that they want to see right away, then you've got to get something from them in writing saying that yes, they want you to present that offer. I feel like you could get that done through an email as long as it shows that they're responding to that email. This is the detail about the buyer supplemental offer letters. Seller good faith. Seller agrees to consider offers presented by broker and act in good faith to accomplish the sale of the property by, among other things, making the property available for showing in reasonable times and subject to paragraph 2C4, referring to broker all inquiries of any party interested in the property. Seller is responsible for determining at what price to list and sell the property. So trying to put some stuff back on them saying like, hey, you guys are ultimately making decisions. I'm making a suggestion on what we think we should sell the house for. You're making that choice to sell it. And when people inquire about the property, you've got to tell me that you've got inquiries about the property if they're going directly to you. And if we have an offer, let's be reasonable about that. And the reason I bring that up is because I know that there are agents out there that are going to watch this video or maybe on this class right now that know for a fact that their seller is not taking amount less than whatever, right? So I know my seller's not taking less than $750,000. Know it. But we come up with this scheme that we're going to list it for $700 to try to drum up the price. And then we get offers at $700, $725, $715, $730, not up to the $750. Okay. But you guys have to act in good faith, which means that if you know that your seller's going to get wants $750 and will not take less than $750, then that's what you should put the marketing at $750. If you know that your seller is okay with somewhere around $750 and you want to list it a slightly below that to try to draw, that's different. But when you know for sure, 100%, that the seller has to get a certain number, whether that be because that's their greed and they want it, or if they don't get that number, they can't get any money, right? They can't at least break even, then that is you guys not acting in good faith. I solely believe that there are agents out there that knowingly list properties less than what they're worth, even if the seller owes more than what they're listing it for, and hope that they can get through a transaction enough to pay off a seller's debt. And I don't like that you're not telling them the truth. And now those transactions, after they're already in motion, turn into short sales, which delays the ability for the buyer to be able to close escrow. Now it could affect their qualifications. You've kind of gummed up the works. I think if we're going to do stuff, we have to be transparent from the beginning. And we've got to, especially with somebody who may be upside down, you've got to list that property at what the price is going to be to at least for them to break even and see if you can get it. But when you're doing these, trying to do a magic trick where you think that you're going to generate so much interest because you've drastically underpriced a property, undervalued a property, I feel like you're doing a disservice to the client, both clients. You're doing a disservice to both clients because you've now enticed the buyer to spend their time, write their offer, and get their offer accepted at a price that you know is no way going to work. And then you've put a seller through the process of selling their house when you know you can't, and now you got to put them through a short sale process when you could have done it the right way from the beginning. So please just be above board, guys. Investigations reports, we talked about that, which reports they're going to order and when they're going to get them. Undisclosed conditions or incomplete or incorrect information. This is telling them hey, you guys have to be, if you're not giving the right information, you could be responsible for what that means for those non-disclosure items. Jesus, go ahead.
Just to clarify to the new agents, and the agents are going to listen to this recording. Mm-hmm. When we have the investigations for, let's say, 12 days. Thus, my buyer has the right to do investigations, a different investigation if he wants to, every single day from day 1 to day 12?
I mean, technically, yeah. I mean, there's nothing in the contract that limits what inspections and how many inspections a buyer can do other than they can't damage the property. That's it. So if I want to do a soil test, I want to have a surveyor come out. I want to have a lead-based paint inspection. I want to have a roof inspection. I want to have a termite inspection. I want to have a professional home inspection. I want to have a plumber come out. I want to have a mold inspection. I can do all of those inspections. As much money as I want to spend, I can absolutely do those as long as I don't damage the property. I do have to share a copy of every one of those reports that I get with the seller. I'm required to do that. But yeah, the seller is not allowed to stop you from having access to the property for that specific amount of time. So there's informational access, which by default is 17 days, and then whatever you've negotiated with your contracts, with the contingency periods. So they have to grant you that. And I know that sellers push back. Yeah, I know sellers push back and they don't want to make it act, but it's contractually you have to.
My last transaction, we had 3 inspections and they didn't allow us to do anymore. And the agent was adamant that we couldn't do anymore. I mean, I didn't want to argue with it, but
yeah, I get that. I mean, sometimes the argument is just a waste of time. I understand. Like, this is the thing that we have to understand about the contracts, about the forms that we cover in these classes, is that in a courtroom or in a legal setting, whether that be small claims or a mediation or arbitration, that's where they carry weight. But there is nothing that we can write on these documents. There's no term that's in here that if you just show it to somebody is magically going to change their mind and do the thing they're supposed to do. Everybody kind of interprets these things differently, and I get it. And they shouldn't be able to do that. It's words on a page. It's not an opinion. It is a direction on how things work and what you're supposed to do. We can't make people follow them. The paper can't make them follow them. What happens then is when you can't do all your full inspections, if something is wrong and you have evidence that a seller refused to allow you access to do your inspections, which you were contractually obligated to do, and there was a major issue with the property that you could find out, then they could be held legally liable. And when you go then to mediation, arbitration, or to litigation, whichever you choose, and you have the documentation that shows that they didn't give you the access that they agreed to give you, then they're going to be held liable. It's going to seriously diminish their ability to defend themselves when they blatantly disregarded the contract that they agreed to. Okay. I'm going to try to run through this. So we're going to go a couple minutes over the 12 o'clock, but I'm going to try to run through this really quick because it's not another class worth of stuff. So I want to get through here. This is about the agency relationships, just like in the purchase agreement. It just talks about how you could be represented by an agent, dual agency, listing, seller's agent or a buyer's agent. This talks about unrepresented buyers. If a buyer is interested in viewing seller's property, is not already represented by a real estate broker, and such buyer refuses to be represented by a broker, seller authorizes broker to obtain a signed document from such buyer refusing representation by broker. Broker shall provide such buyers at the earliest practicable time a disclosure of non-representation, such as a buyer non-agency or an open house visitor non-agency disclosure and sign-in. Right? So now what they're saying is, I'm making sure that I'm not representing you. You've signed that. That's what that means when we talked about that earlier about the compensation for non-represented buyers, right? The additional compensation the seller pays you. This is the confirmation of agency and termination of agency relationship. It just goes into some detail. This one, I think you should always make sure you have a conversation with security, insurance, showings, audio, and video. If they're recording stuff, you guys have to put up something that shows that people are being recorded when they go in. There is no insurance. There is no security like for the house. So if during showings something were to happen, I'm not responsible, right? So you got to tell your sellers, and I don't know how many of you guys do this, but you should be telling your sellers when we're doing, if you're going to have a lockbox and doing open house, like allowing people to just come in and do showings, don't have anything valuable. Put it away. Lock it up, put it somewhere else, make sure it's safe. And that includes medications. We've talked about this in the past. When you're doing an open house, make sure that all your valuables are put away. Anything that could be broken that you don't want broken. Anything that could be stolen that you don't want stolen. Anything that has any value to you, make sure it is not accessible to anybody because I am not responsible. If something gets stolen from your house because we're doing an open house, I'm not responsible for it, okay? This talks about the photographs. So we were talking about not having photographs, so it explains to them how that works. Explains how the key safe lockbox works and the benefits. right? Talks about tenant occupied properties with the key safe lockbox, and there's a form, the KLA, that you could use to what are the terms with a tenant. Talks about the sign, equal housing, do not discriminate is basically what that's saying. Attorney fees, if there's some issue between the buyer and seller, between us and the seller, and between the seller and the buyer, they're responsible for their own legal fees. Management approval, we have the right to reject your guys' listings within 5 days of you taking it. So if you turn us in the listing, we can review it and we can say, okay, it's fine, or we could say, nope, you're not taking this listing. Don't really ever do that, but management and brokers can reject listings if they don't agree with the terms that you've taken that listing on. Successors and assignees, this is the thing with listings. If I take a listing with someone and that seller passes away, technically my listing is still the responsibility of their successors. Okay? So keep in mind that a listing is kind of forever. Now, are we going to keep the listing as they go through the process of probate and all those things? It maybe not, because it takes so long to do it, but technically I have a binding listing agreement that succeeds the passing of my seller. Dispute resolution is mediation on here. If you want to do arbitration, you have to have a separate arbitration agreement with sellers. It's not like a purchase agreement where it's already in there. This talks about the ownership and title that we were talked about earlier. Legally authorized signers, that's if there is like an entity and that seller is signing, they have 3 days after the execution of the agreement to show proof that they're authorized to sign on behalf of that entity. There's the entity sellers. So if it is an entity, a trust, a corporation, a partnership, you have to check this box. Make sure you have the correct signers' names for the entity. Then the sellers will sign it. The broker is going to sign it. And if you're dual-late, like if you're co-listing with somebody, whether they're in-house or out, you can have both the names here, have everybody sign. If it's in-house, you do the additional agent acknowledgement. If it is outside with a broker from outside, then you do the additional broker acknowledgement. Those are the two different things. Okay, we've got a couple questions. What about if buyers have accident in an open house? Is household insurance responsible? The homeowner's insurance could be responsible if somebody gets injured on their property. There's nothing that we could do about that. What if they don't show proof that they can sign for that entity? Then you can send them a notice to perform, and if they don't do that, then you could cancel. Like in this case, for the listing, I don't think your seller's going to refuse to give you the proof, but in an offer that you receive from an entity, if they refuse to give it to you, that proof within 3 days, then yes, you could send them a notice to perform, and if they don't do it, you could cancel. So again, if you got two agents from the same office that are going to take this listing, then you would put both names in here, right? Who are the two agents? And then check the box so that it adds this AAA, which is the additional agent acknowledgement. And what that does is it shows who else is responsible for this listing. And if it's a co-list with an outside offer, you just do that. Okay. All right. So we went a couple minutes late to get through the listing agreement. Before I let you guys go, I'm going to stop sharing. Do you have any questions for me? Anybody? All right. Terrific. Hopefully this will help you guys with the listing, clarify some things as you guys go on your listing appointments, becoming listing agents. You always know where to find me if you need anything. I'm always available for you guys. Again, if you missed any part of this, it will be on YouTube later today. Please go there, subscribe to the channel, watch the videos, share this with everybody you know so that we can make sure that we can educate as many agents out there as possible, because that just helps us in the long run when we're doing business with people to make sure they know what they're doing. So I appreciate you guys being here. I really do. Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and be productive and safe out there. Talk to you later.